So today's session, we are going to be looking at the way we tell our stories about our retrofit journey, how we communicate these to our key stakeholders. So that's residents, that's colleagues, other interested stakeholders that might have an interest in what you're doing. So today's session, what we're going to be having a look at is to think about the tools that you might need or the considerations in order to forge those partnerships and key stakeholders, helping you to really tell that lived experience, that local play-based idea about your project. Really think about some of the blockers to that change and really have that focus of putting people at the heart of what the solution is going to be. So a real people-focused kind of highlight for this session. So we're thinking about those kind of local projects. So we're thinking about who's involved. So in the spirit of storytelling, really thinking about the characters who were involved, really thinking about the blockers to that. Are there particular groups of people, particular organisations? And that can be internal departments as well, who we might want to identify as the villains in this. Again, this is for the purpose of kind of the storytelling idea. And then really thinking about the solution, you know, in the spirit of fairy tales and stories, we often have that happily ever after. In the context of our retrofit project, what we're wanting to do is have that project be successful on a multitude of different levels, have that satisfaction of those people who've been involved, and particularly the residents who will be living in those properties. So again, really thinking about it in the kind of the idea of storytelling and bringing all of those ideas together. When we're thinking about storytelling, we're thinking about so many different elements. So again, with your retrofit project, we're thinking about a whole kind of array of different things that are going to come into play. So we're going to have the narrative, you know, what is the story that we are telling? Who's going to be telling that story? And what is the information that we're trying to say? We're going to have that data behind that. So that might be information from energy performance certificates, or it might be an asset management review that has highlighted a particular issue. It might even be something around customer hub data on damp and mold, for example. And then we've got to think about the visuals, the information. What are we trying to say? How are we going to tell that story? And we have these overlaps in this Venn diagram around getting that change, getting that positive change. We're wanting to engage with people. We're wanting to enlighten people in terms of what it is that we're trying to do. And we're really wanting to explain it so that people understand in their context, their language, and their level of understanding about actually what is taking place. So I really like this diagram in terms of bringing together all of those key elements for your project. When we are thinking about who the characters are, for each project, you will have different people who are going to be involved. And these, I think, in terms of storytelling, represent the key characters for that. When we're thinking about it in terms of the elements that might be traditionally involved, I guess, we have people, we have children in the top left picture here about, you know, we're trying to address climate change, we're trying to reduce energy consumption, we're trying to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we're using in our homes. Ultimately, this is about our time right now, but also for future generations as well. Top right, we then have our kind of operatives, our contractors, our people involved in the project. They also represent key stakeholders in any retrofit project. This will also include people like internal maintenance teams or contractors who are on a maintenance contract. How is this project going to impact them? Bottom left, we then have the community. Whereabouts are you doing this project? Who's going to be involved? What type of buildings are you looking at? Are we talking about single dwelling bungalows? Are we talking about multitude of high-rise flats? Again, what is that community that is going to be around that? And last but not least, we've got the kind of technology. So bottom right, what are we talking about here? You know, what is involved? Are we talking about insulation upgrades? So this might be to lofts, this might be to floors, this might be an internal wall insulation project, or are we involving more different technology that might not be something that people have heard of before or aware of for whatever reasons? And therefore, we're thinking about actually that's an important part of our storytelling here. When we're thinking about the characters, we're thinking about the language, we're thinking about the terminology. Some of you who might have attended events before will have seen this slide. Really kind of important in terms of that shift in language that we are using. For a lot of people, fuel poverty will be top of their agenda in terms of addressing that internally in terms of your organisation, but also in terms of the residents and the tenants that you kind of might be working with. So again, we're thinking about, okay, energy is a real kind of issue at the moment. You know, bills are still much higher than they have been historically. And how do we deal with that? Your retrofit project can be potentially part of that solution. So bringing in all of those ideas, tapping into what people might find key for them. When I've worked with changing behaviours in organisations before, it's really about finding what matters to people. And actually, for some in a retrofit project, it might be about feeling warm over winter. For others, it might be actually about bills. For others, it might be about how their property looks. You know, they want to take pride in the property that they're living in. So again, really thinking about what it is that is going to enable people to be supportive and part of the story, because it's not something that is happening to them. They are part of this journey, part of the story, and that language we use, really important. This brings me on to this slide in terms of the actual, as well as vocabulary, it's talking about language. So again, understanding the communities where the project might be taking place. It might be that English is the predominant language. It might not be. So therefore, we need to be really thinking about what other language do we need to be using? And this might be Urdu, it might be Portuguese, it might be Spanish, it might be Welsh. I don't know what your community is like. It could be multitude of different ways that we want to communicate and different language availability so that we can communicate the story that we're trying to tell about our retrofit project as clearly as we possibly can. It's also thinking about those protected characteristics of your residents, of your colleagues, of the stakeholders. There might be disability issues. So it might be around having printed in Braille, for example. It might be that it is audio described. Whatever it might be, really think about who is involved and therefore how are we going to communicate this. And I think there are lots of tools that are really successfully used to cover this. And it's about using your experience of how things have been communicated before, what's worked well, what hasn't. And we can also bring in ideas about digital connectivity here, or whether we need to have leaflets or something up in a lift. Ultimately, it's about people, and it's those connections to different people. So this next kind of section, we will be looking at some of the kind of details around that. We have a case study later as well from a SHRA recipient to talk through some of the kind of key things that they learned in a retrofit project. So identifying the characters, really thinking about those other local projects that exist in your locality. It might be that there is a mother and baby group that meet on a Wednesday morning. It might be that there is a Men in Sheds project that is situated in the kind of community where this project is going to be. It can be food banks. It can be a whole range of other different projects that exist already in your neighbourhood that you are looking at, in which you can build those connections, find those key stakeholders to involve in the project, and really think about how that has worked. We might also want to be thinking about retrofit projects or significant works projects that have gone on before. So I'm thinking here window replacements, kitchen or bathroom improvements. In that particular area where you're planning your retrofit project, how did that go? What worked well? What maybe could have been done better in a lessons learned approach? And maybe think about, okay, well, how can we learn from it now? Some of the key personnel involved will still be around, I would guess, internally or externally, and making sure that that open dialogue is really created. Really think about it in terms of different people to involve. It might be that there's a colleague who is already on this masterclass today that actually has a load of fantastic information. Absolutely use that massive resources as that character and that key personnel to involve. But ultimately, it's about using your network. You might identify that there's a gap in your network, and therefore it's a massive opportunity to explore how to extend that, to improve it, to increase the diversity in that, and really build on those networks, particularly around your stakeholders, your key residents that might want to get involved as well, and making sure that it is, again, that's something that everyone is involved with rather than something that is happening to someone. When we're thinking about characters, again, it's, understanding their lived experiences, understanding what has worked well for different people. It's thinking about actually what is their personal journey as well. For a retrofit project, really great to have a look at another project that has kind of worked well. It doesn't matter about size or scale here, but something that has worked well in your organisation. How did it start? How was progress managed and monitored? Was there any particular issues or key milestones that needed to be met or weren't met? Quite often in construction, we look at, getting particular milestones, and then the weather does something and it causes absolute chaos in that program and our plan, and we have to redefine it. But it's about accepting that actually that does happen. And so things like snow over winter can be particularly problematic. Likewise, in summer, excess heat can be a real problem, particularly in urban settings, but not to say that's not the case in rural settings either. But understanding how actually that might have been something that historically happened. Scaffold could have been left up longer than was originally planned for a multitude of reasons. Really thinking about priorities of people as well. So again, going back to that slide on customer journey, is it about energy bills? Is it about having a safe, secure, warm space, particularly over winter? Is it somewhere that they can easily manage themselves, that it doesn't have a complicated system to manage it or to drive it? And really think about those key stakeholders that have been involved there. Hopefully you will have a fabulous resident liaison officer who might be able to provide some insights there. You might also have estate managers, tenancy managers as well, in terms of understanding who the characters are, understanding any particular vulnerabilities to that, understanding any protected characteristics, and really thinking about how this fits in with your EDI strategy as well. And really think about what is the outcome that has been experienced before. If it hasn't gone well, understanding that actually this is a new project, that things will be done differently. It might be different materials, it might be different contractors. It might be that actually it was previously done before PAS 2035 and PAS 2030. So therefore, some of those details will be ensured to be kind of taken forward. So again, it's really understanding those particular people that you have who can provide that insight and be ultimately supportive of your project. Slightly negative now, thinking of those people, those groups of people, those particular departments, maybe particular individuals as well. Who have been the villains in this? Who has been or where have you found blockers to the project? It might be resistant to change. It might be dialogue. It might be language. It might be not understanding what the project is in a kind of level of detail, and therefore actually not wanting to kind of be involved in that project. Trust issues come up a lot of times with projects. If you kind of look back at where things have gone wrong, particularly if you do the Retrofit Bootcamp, which is our one-day session, we look at the Fishwick example from Preston, which was a project that is still being rectified today and led to significant problems. If you were a tenant in that property or a resident in that property, having trust in an organisation to improve it when previously it didn't work will be a real kind of blocker and a hurdle to really work through to get that project through and get it successful. So again, understanding how people can change opinions. Is there a particular voice that can be utilised to support that? And when we look at the example in a couple of slides, we'll look at that. But certainly when I've talked to tenant groups, having someone who maybe lives in the pilot project can be a really great way of exploring that and breaking down some of those barriers and those blockers to that acceptance of having that project take place. So again, we're thinking about what is the solution to this. We've understood our people, we've understood the project, really thinking about actually how did the project turn out. You know, we're thinking about those outcomes, and the outcomes of the project absolutely link back to past 2035 and past 2030 in terms of making sure we have those kind of outcomes addressed and planned for. Think about what that criteria is. It might be around tenant satisfaction. It might be around reduced tenancy movements. If you have particularly poor performing properties, people might not spend a lot of time in there, might want to request an alternative property. How do we kind of address that? There might be in your asset management strategy, you might kind of rank estates or areas. How are you going to kind of improve that those popular areas remain popular, but also there's areas that people aren't less keen to want to be a resident of? How can we elevate those so that actually we have much more of a nice band of properties that people want to have a look at? Compromise, absolutely. It's thinking about how can we do this, how can we do it differently to get the same objective. So working through those problems, listening to people and working through. So Home Group wanted to address some of the worst performing EPC properties in their portfolio. This was from a previous wave. Absolutely hit by COVID, restrictions in terms of access, restrictions in terms of availability of materials as well. And what they needed to really think about was get that communication and think about how communication is really key to getting that support, getting those projects over the line. Getting access as well is a key element here. So this is taken from one of their senior management. There's no point pretending there isn't customer resistance to retrofit. It's our job to bring them on board with net zero. So again, appreciating that is an issue, that resistance to change, not allowing access is a problem, and you know, is something that needs to be overcome and worked through. So a couple more slides on kind of what they did and kind of how they had to look at this. You can look at this in more detail on the Inside Housing link, which is at the bottom of this slide. You will get your slides after the event today, so you'll be able to click into those. One of the key things that they talk about, the Home Group, in terms of that storytelling for this project, is that people didn't have enough information to be able to consider making an informed choice. So again, it's thinking, okay, well, what information is going to be essential here? In part of my story, how am I going to include that information that it makes sense, that it is very clear, it is very transparent in terms of what we are trying to achieve here? And actually what they found is that friends and family were a real asset in terms of getting that shift and getting that change to the acceptance, to banishing that resistance. So we can go back to our analogy about a villain. That resistance is definitely a villain, a blocker in the storytelling. And really think about, okay, well, actually, how can we shift this? How can we change this for our benefit? So again, really thinking about, what is the running costs that are going to be involved in this? Is this going to financially be something that I need to be concerned of and worried about? Is it going to be complicated? And I hear this quite often with heat pumps, because it is a different way of delivering the heat. It's more about a constant secured temperature rather than peaks and troughs with, say, a gas boiler, because you turn it on, you wait for the radiator, you feel the radiator, oh yeah, lovely, toasty, and then it'll go off again, but then you might want to put it back on. Heat pumps are very different. And I think the analogy we can really use here is that shift from solid fuel. So years ago, when we shifted to a gas-based system for the majority of homes in the UK are on a gas system for heating. We went from solid fuel that had to be collected, it had to be stored, to something that came through into our properties. So again, it's a very similar shift in terms of how we do things, that thermal level of comfort that we're going to get. If you think about solid fuel, quite often it might have been a back burner, it might have been in a fireplace in the lounge. The lounge would have been nice and warm, but actually if you went into any other rooms that didn't have a heating source, you would feel the chill there. Whereas central heating has brought that across the home. Heat pumps, again, it's across the home, it's a maintained temperature. But understanding that as something that is part of the retrofit project is sometimes really key. And again, I talk about this quite a lot with resident engagement and kind of storytelling around projects. Disruption to homes can be something that is really significant for people. We've got to think about health and well-being and wellness in this. If you are not used to people coming into your property, for example, you might, that might not be something that takes place, but actually you're going to have some contractors in your room doing something. It might be fitting new controls, whatever it might be. That disruption can be a point of stress. So understanding what that level of disruption will look like. And again, we can plan for this. Things happen, contractors go into administration, we have extreme weather events as well. So understanding how actually that there will be disruption that is planned for in the retrofit project, but also there might be unexpected things as well, and how to do that damage limitation, those mitigating circumstances, and understanding that actually things can change and do quite regularly change, not just in retrofit projects, but in construction projects. The key thing here, I think, that Home Group report is around those massive benefits that their residents have now seen as part of this retrofit project. What they can now use is that evidence base, those bits of feedback, some really nice customer quotes to feed back to new retrofit projects. And provide that to people to understand actually there were these benefits. Certain things did happen, but actually here's our benefit. And I really love this example, and this is taken from a particular point in time, so pricing might be different, but they talk about, one customer told us that their monthly bills have gone from £7 per day to 70p a day. Interestingly, as a way forward, they also found that the pilot resulted in some customers becoming our green champions. So again, finding those key personnel to be the champion of retrofit projects in a particular community, telling that story, bringing forward those ideas, and taking forward that open dialogue around different projects. The last point I want to make on this slide is around that early engagement. When we talk about resident engagement, ideally we're looking before 12 months before the project's due to start on the ground. Again, sometimes we are constrained by times, but actually that early engagement with customers, so the residents and the people in the properties and internal teams, was key. So again, those internal stakeholders in different departments that will be a real asset to any particular project. And this can include finance, so making sure that invoicing is all set up and contractors are going to be paid on time. Thinking about different resourcing, maybe in tenancy, you might have customer hubs, really aligning those key people so that we have this really nice mix of people to all tell the story, to get that buy-in and take the project forward. Again, you can use this link to have a look in terms of some more details around that project. So for your project in particular, think about it as you are the main character. You are telling your story. You are wanting to do this retrofit project. We are motivated to do this, but you're not doing it by yourself. It's not a one-person project. It's going to involve lots of people. So who else is going to be involved here? Who are the major stakeholders? Internally, you might have senior managers. You might have colleagues that you work with. You might have maintenance teams. But externally as well, you might have a main contractor. You might have subcontractors. You might have local agencies that are kind of getting involved as well. I'm thinking of kind of social services, NHS trusts, but also the third sector as well, thinking about food banks. It might be other kind of agencies that you can kind of think of to be involved in this project. Thinking about selling your story. So if you were trapped in a lift with someone and wanted to tell them actually what you were doing in 3 minutes, could you do that? Could you collect the essence of what this project is? Who's already your ally? Who is your kind of support here? It might be that you have a line manager. You might have colleagues who are actually all passionate about progressing your retrofit project. But also thinking, who else might we need to convince in this? It might be that actually, because a project might have not gone so well before, that actually your comms team might need to be supported a little bit more in terms of helping you to tell that message and to tell that message and your story in a much kind of more positive way. Thinking about those local networks as well, internally in terms of your organisation, but also wider groups. So you might be in a zero carbon hub network, your local, the other RPs in your local area. You might have a kind of regular retrofit online network that you all kind of sit into. Professional institutes as well. You might be in RICS, so Institute of Chartered Surveyors. You might be in IEMA, which is Institute of Environmental Management Assessment. Think about who in your network can help and support here. How can you get that message out? Likewise, if there are any research institutes that you could ask for kind of being involved in particular projects, or localized charities. So thinking about crisis, shelter, women's refuges. There's a whole array of different examples here that we can kind of bring into that. And are there any projects in your local area that you could use as a baseline? So what has worked well before? How do you want to align your project to how that works? If it worked really well, absolutely think about how you can apply some of the key learning from that to your project. And really be specific about your project. Each project will be unique because of the building structure, the age of the structure, the number of units that you're looking at, how spread out they are over your portfolio. And so really think about, okay, what are going to be some of the issues here? Again, with the analogy of storytelling, we're thinking about the villains here. Is there something, someone, groups of people who are particularly blocking this project? Is there that resistance to change? How can you manage that? How can you address that? Is it going to be open dialogue with particular individuals? Is it going to be workshops? Is it going to be, I don't know, newsletters that need to go out to people to kind of help understand that project? What's worked well for you in the past? Again, building on the strengths that you will have. Where have benefits been seen with doing a particular communications package, for example? You might have a group who use Facebook a lot, and therefore actually that might be a really nice mechanism of getting the information, getting that feedback. It might be that actually you have forum sessions. So, you know, Wednesday at 11 o'clock, for example, you might have a forum where you can actually discuss these issues. Or you might need to set up bespoke sessions online, in person, a multitude of different ways. Again, understanding the residents will be key to this. And reaching out to your network, who has done similar projects, what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, and how have they managed to kind of deal with that particular blocker. This might be a resident-based issue, it might be a contractor-based issue, or it could even be an internal approval issue. So again, depending on your organisation, how it's set up, you might find different blockers at different stages as well. So again, understanding that can be part of the challenge. So when we're thinking about the solution, you know, we want everyone to have a successful retrofit project. We want to see those reductions in carbon emissions, improvements to infrastructure and the asset that we have, increasing satisfaction as well. So put people at the heart of the solution, understand the language that people are using and the pieces of communication that they are telling you. How can we kind of get down those barriers that might exist? Absolutely use your network. You know, there will be colleagues internally and externally who will be able to provide that insight. One of the things I love about the drop-in sessions that we do through the SHRA project is that people share, and that peer-to-peer learning can be a fantastic source of information and support as well. So that learning from others, absolutely see what other people have been doing, get that insight. Not to say that you're just going to copy what they've done, but absolutely learn from those experiences and take it forward in your bespoke project. Try and mitigate any potential problems before they arise. This can always be a challenge, but absolutely really think about some of those issues that you might face. And use your kind of support network that you already have. You might have a really great group that you already kind of use. But above all, it's about telling your story. What is the retrofit project? How are you doing it? Who's going to be involved? And really spread that word of how you're going to do it. So think about the story. So again, in terms of planning your project, planning how you're going to storytell it, set a really clear plan. You know, think about who your characters are. Maybe don't call them the characters or villains, but think about all the people who are going to be involved. Think about departments, internally, externally, groups that you're aware of, charities that might be important in terms of telling that story. Really think about a clear, concise and convincing storyline. Is it about improving heating solutions? Is it about preventing draftiness and leaky properties? Are we thinking about that energy conservation piece? So really think about designing your story, planning it all out, and this can be done in a whole different array. Lots of people might like to do it on kind of pen and paper and kind of really plan it out and pull in ideas. Other people might like to use particular software or do it digitally in terms of telling that story and having that key plan involved there. But overall, it's about telling that story. It's about selling your story. Really think about all levels in your organization and the company that you are kind of going to be utilizing. It's absolutely about getting that buy-in. It's about generating that noise around your project. Gain as much support as you can as possible and be clear on what that support entails. It might be supporting events, it might be providing communications digitally or printed, it might be language skills, it might be an EDI representative who is really going to champion your strategy around EDI, particularly in the context of your retrofit project. It might be the person you sit next to in the office. There's a whole heap of people that can absolutely be that advocate for you, support your story, and be part of that story as well. So again, it's part of for everyone. It's not just one person who is leading this challenge. Make your argument as convincing as possible. Evidence, data, visuals. Drive that engagement, and that can be through a multitude of ways. And share your passion with others. I'm hoping that on this call we've got some passionate people who might like to share their story as well, but absolutely share that passion, utilize that story and get those ideas across.